This is perhaps the most critical waiver wire video of the season because it is week 8 and we have 6 teams on a bye. Arizona Cardinals, Detroit Lions, Jacksonville Jaguars, Las Vegas Raiders, Los Angeles Rams, and the Seattle Seahawks. That is three prominent teams that are taking away our fantasy players, and then 2 teams with multiple weekly fantasy options, and then also the Raiders, of course. So we need streaming options here, and this week there's no big waiver wire ad here, so that means that we have to be very intentional about grabbing the right guys for your fantasy needs. Let's go ahead and dive right in. I had Monangai listed as a stash in the Beat the Waiver Wire video this week. Monangai has definitely appeared in my waiver wire videos and stash videos before because 1, I absolutely loved him as a prospect, but 2, I view him as one of the higher end handcuffs available on waivers. The reason he was on the stash list this week specifically was due to DeAndre Swift's injury concern, which thankfully turned out to be a complete non-issue. Better safe than sorry, but Swift had a fantastic day, so it didn't matter. The good news, though, is that Monangai showed us exactly why he is such a valuable stash with his best performance of the season. 13 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown, plus 2 receptions on 3 targets for 13 yards. Now, some of those carries were in garbage time production, but Monangai was very involved early on and literally played on the Bears' second drive and got that goal line touchdown that put them up by 20 in the second quarter. Roschon Johnson didn't exist, and each week we continue to see more and more usage for Kyle Monangai. Swift has been fantastic, so Monangai is not a threat to his workload, but the Bears are moving the ball extremely well. And it's possible that we continue to see standalone value for Kyle Monangai, especially with the upcoming schedule that they have. Baltimore, Cincinnati, the Giants, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, all favorable matchups for volume. At the very least, he is the clear direct handcuff with 0 competition and would immediately step into an RB1 role if Swift were to get injured. If you're a subscriber, you know this. We've talked about Brashard Smith quite a bit this offseason and multiple times in season. In a perfect world, Kareem Hunt doesn't exist, and this would just be a very clean early down, passing down split between Isaiah Pacheco and Brashard Smith. And we kind of got to see what that perfect world would look like in week 7. Now, a lot of Smith's production came from the Chiefs demolishing the Raiders. Like, literally 10 of his carries were in the fourth quarter, so we are not overreacting, but we are acting very appropriately here because he was involved throughout the entire game. It is clear they have a vision for his role within the offense, particularly leaning on him in the pass game. He had 5 receptions on 5 targets for 42 yards, and he added 14 carries for 39 yards. Now, again, most of that receiving work was in the first half. The uptick in carries definitely game script in the second half, but the Chiefs' offense has looked spectacular. Patrick Mahomes is absolutely dealing. He is pushing an aggressive pace here, consistently hitting a minimum of 30 pass attempts and being incredibly efficient with it. If the Chiefs just whittle this backfield down to 2 backs, I think we can legitimately have weekly flex value for Smith. For 2 straight weeks now, Kayshon Boutte has delivered double-digit fantasy points. Boutte was a weekly stash for me because we were just waiting for everything to kind of come together here. And now we are finally seeing consistent volume from Drake May to the receiving corps specifically, and it looks like we can actually rely on Kayshon Boutte. I still consider Stefon Diggs the most valuable and stable receiver in this offense, but as we have talked about in the waiver wire stash video, we're seeing week over week improvement from Drake May. While he's not throwing for huge volume, he has been highly efficient. When you are completing literally 75% of your passes, you don't have to chuck the ball for the offense to thrive. The key here is who is consistently on the field, and Kayshon Boutte has been the receiver with the most snaps and most routes run, more than Stefon Diggs, since the team is still obviously being cautious with him. Now, Boutte's role is solidified in this offense, and he continues to make the most out of every opportunity. He has a 78% catch rate on the year and over 100 yards with 3 touchdowns over the past 2 games. Looking at the Patriots' remaining schedule, there are only 3 truly difficult matchups: Cleveland next week and then 2 meetings with the Jets later in the season. The Patriots are well positioned here, and Kayshon Boutte should continue to improve. This literally just must be my week because all of my favorite deep rookie prospects hit in the exact same week. What are the coincidences here? Oronde Gadsden was an absolute superstar this week with 7 receptions on 9 targets for 164 yards and a touchdown, an incredible performance. Now, what makes this even crazier is that while he led the day in fantasy points, he wasn't actually the highest volume pass catcher. Keenan Allen had 11 receptions on 14 targets for 119 yards and a touchdown. Ladd McConkey had 9 receptions on 15 targets for 67 yards. And poor Quentin Johnston, he did manage to get 2 receptions on 6 targets for 30 yards, but he did find the end zone there. I included those stats because it's important to remember that while this was a fantastic performance by Gadsden and not the first time that we have seen him thrive, the Chargers' offense is absolutely stacked top to bottom with pass catchers. This week, Justin Herbert threw a massive 55 passes for 420 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions as they chased the Colts. That level of volume is definitely an outlier, one that allowed everyone to produce. Now, that said, it is abundantly clear the Chargers have moved on to Gadsden as their tight end 1, and we are unlikely, fingers crossed, to see Will Dissly in a significant role again. Despite the crowded offense, I can get on board with Gadsden as a fantasy option if he is the only tight end that they are truly featuring, and the snaps do support that. He's increased his snap count every single week, and this week was his highest yet, playing 60 of 73 snaps, roughly 80% and running 47 routes. That's a tight end 1, people. There's not a ton to talk about here because up to this point, we have had extremely limited usage and success from Colston Loveland. However, we are starting to see a slow but steady increase in involvement, and with Cole Kmet injuring his back in Sunday's game, that could maybe open up the door for Loveland to become the clear tight end 1 here. Now, I've noticed some disrespect towards Colston Loveland, particularly because he was drafted higher than Tyler Warren, and Warren has significantly outproduced him. I love Tyler Warren. He was one of my favorite targets in drafts this year for tight ends, so this is no insult to him, but we cannot compare these two situations at all. Warren walked into an offense with no incumbent competition at tight end and a clear path to being the first look in the passing game, and that is why I love targeting him in drafts. Realistically, Loveland was never going to be that in an offense featuring Rome Odunze, let alone Rome Odunze and DJ Moore, plus an existing tight end on a big contract. If Kmet is out, though, we could finally see real opportunity for Loveland. We're finally fairly deep at tight end overall, so he's lower on the priority list, but again, bye weeks here, several big players on a bye this week. If you are looking for a streaming option, you cannot ask for a better matchup than Baltimore, and if Cole Kmet's injury does linger, the following matchup next week would be against Cincinnati, another favorable spot. Spears didn't have a fantastic day, but he is still worthy of a roster. In week 6, he outsnapped Tony Pollard and outperformed him, playing 36 snaps compared to just 26 by Pollard, and Spears finished as RB21. That was very encouraging. This week, however, Tony Pollard outsnapped him, playing 30 snaps, while Spears played 23. Pollard had 6 carries. Spears had 5. Neither one of that is particularly good. Now, Spears, again, we thought he was going to have this receiving edge, but that went back to Pollard this week. It's committee, and neither one of them is garnering enough snaps to have a massive upside here. And as we talked about in prior videos, the value is in receiving work because the Titans are playing from behind. But we do need to know that the Titans are showing some level of consistency with who will actually get that receiving work on a week-to-week basis. Still, there's enough here for us to want to stash and roster on our bench, and particularly maybe for a little spot start if you're in a rough spot this week, Tyjae Spears. Troy Franklin wasn't the most productive Broncos receiver on the day, but a spike in production isn't why we want to invest in him. It's because Franklin continues to operate as the wide receiver 2, playing the second most snaps behind Courtland Sutton and running the second most routes behind Courtland Sutton as well. While Franklin didn't have a big fantasy day, he did lead the team in targets with 10, catching 3 of them for 19 yards and a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. Again, Sutton is the clear wide receiver 1, and Marvin Mims does have streaming value thanks to Bo Nix's passing volume here, and Sean Payton's creative usage of him in gadget plays, which can create random upside, but it's Franklin's consistency that makes him appealing. He's averaging 9.9 fantasy points per game in PPR with over 6 targets per game, giving him constant streaming value in good matchups. Fortunately, the Broncos have several favorable matchups ahead of them from a passing standpoint starting this week against Dallas. That is literally a perfect bye week fill-in. Things could be changing in New York. The Jets are now 0-7 and benched Justin Fields for Tyrod Taylor, who somehow managed to look even worse. At this point, they're playing for the first overall pick, or perhaps just pride, I don't know, but for fantasy purposes, their struggles increase the likelihood that Breece Hall becomes a trade candidate. Despite the team's issues, Hall has performed about as well as you could expect in such a dire situation. We talked about this in the Waiver Wire Stash video. The run game hasn't been bad. We'd just like to see more consistency and touchdown opportunities, but Hall is averaging just over 11 fantasy points per game and has been a low-end RB2 with a fairly stable floor rather than being a boom-bust kind of profile. If Hall were to be traded, Isaiah Davis would be the lead back with no competition. It would be a pure volume play here with receiving upside, as we have seen a decent amount of checkdowns in this offense. And Davis had just 2 carries this week. It's still Hall's backfield, of course, but he did flash his receiving upside, which is what we want to see, catching 2 of his 4 targets for 22 yards. Again, we're not starting Davis anytime soon. This is strictly a stash based on trade speculation around Hall. I promise this is not chasing random points. I am going to bat for a player I truly believe in, not just from what we saw in OTAs and preseason, but what I saw all throughout the draft scouting process. By the way, don't think this channel is going into hibernation once the fantasy season ends. Oh no, I love the NFL offseason, covering free agency, prepping for the draft, covering incoming rookies, and finding hidden fantasy gems is one of my favorite parts of fantasy football. Brashard Smith was one of those players, and Chimere Dike was another here. Dike was overlooked in the draft process, in my opinion, but you know who didn't overlook him? NFL teams. NFL teams didn't, particularly the Tennessee Titans, who drafted him ahead of Alec Iron-Maynor. Yeah, Dike was the higher drafted rookie. Now, that is not a knock to Iron-Maynor. It just shows that this production from Dike wasn't some random undrafted rookie temporarily filling in. Now, Calvin Ridley didn't practice all week and likely wasn't close to returning. It's a hamstring injury. We talk about it all the time. Unfortunately, here, they tend to linger multiple weeks. Dike caught all 4 of his targets for 70 yards and a touchdown. He has been very active in every single game this year because he's had a big role on special teams. Despite that production, Dike's snaps still lagged behind Iron-Maynor and Van Jefferson this week, but that's less likely about them and more likely about the fact that they keep running Tyler Lockett out there for reasons unknown to me. But after this performance, perhaps they fully commit to the rookie. Maybe losing Calvin Ridley was the door that finally opened things up for more opportunities for Dike. And with the Titans firing their head coach, we could continue to see a broader offensive changes as well. Whether this was due to Calvin Ridley's absence, Chimere Dike being rewarded for his great work on special teams, or simply them trying something new offensively to get things going, regardless, he took full advantage of the opportunity, even if you don't add him now, because this is more of a deeper league move. You need to keep your eye on him. Friendly reminder, if he is on waivers, he shouldn't be, because Jaxson Dart is not a streaming option. He is a must roster that should be rostered in every single league. Friendly reminder also to subscribe to the channel, because we talked about Jaxson Dart in this matchup against Denver in the high-risk start-sit video. I said this right here would be our litmus test for how much we can truly trust Jaxson Dart, and this might be the opportunity for him to really break through. And while the Giants unfortunately lost in a very demoralizing fashion, we came away with one very clear conclusion. Jaxson Dart is an absolute must-roster quarterback with weekly QB1 upside. We have seen excellent work from Dart this season, especially from a fantasy perspective, but we truly hadn't seen a high volume game from him until now. That is exactly what we got in this matchup. Dart completed 15 of 33 attempts for 283 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 1 interception. While he didn't have his usual 50-plus yards on the ground, he still added a rushing touchdown, an overall fantastic day for him. This was his best performance of the season, and it came in his toughest matchup yet. Since becoming the starter in Week 4, his worst fantasy finish was QB 16, and his other 3 starts have all been top 12 weeks. That has come against the Chargers, Saints, Eagles, and now the Broncos. Heading into the season, we knew that the Giants would have one of the most difficult schedules, but it was front-loaded in terms of difficulty. Another matchup against Philly, and then after that, Dart has a very favorable stretch ahead, either facing soft defenses or strong offenses that will force him to keep pace and throw for volume. With no bye week until Week 14, Dart is officially a quarterback that you can plug into your lineup every single week and consider your only starter. Finally, a quick note on Jalen Coker for transparency purposes, because I talked a lot about him, and I still believe in him. Don't get me wrong on that. Unfortunately, the Panthers clearly eased him back in. He appeared to be in rotation with Jimmy Horn and Bryson Tremaine, but started to see more work as the game went on, suggesting perhaps a larger role next week. I still prefer to lean into Coker's potential rather than chasing points with Xavier Legette. Don't get me wrong, Legette had an excellent day, his best of the season, with 9 receptions on 11 targets for 92 yards and a touchdown. But as I mentioned earlier in the Waiver Wire Stash video when we were discussing Jalen Coker, the Jets' defense typically limits opposing wide receiver ones, leading to random breakout games from secondary receivers. My best example of this was Ryan Flournoy outproducing George Pickens in that one random week against the Jets. So if you are looking to add Xavier Legette off waivers, do proceed with caution. You can do it if you need it and you're in a pinch. This may be a true breakout performance, and he follows it up with another strong game, and maybe this is what drives him into becoming the wide receiver we'd hoped that he would be. Or maybe this is just another matchup-driven spike in production. I'll need more proof personally from a wide receiver who has had a sub 50% catch rate prior to this game. In fact, Week 7's performance only slightly nudged him above a 50% catch rate for the season. When your floor has consistently been 1 fantasy point, you gotta prove it to me more. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can also find me across all social media platforms at It's Tara Time. So make sure that you are tuned in, subscribed, turned on notifications, and all that good stuff, because I am bringing you more fantasy football content all season long. Every week I've got you covered with top waiver wire ads, live show, stashes, live Q&A where you can ask me questions, and so much more.